My name is Samantha Cole. I am a lieutenant in the United States Coast Guard. Most days, my work is about precision, discipline, and making sure everyone comes home alive. But nothing in my service prepared me for the sight in front of me now. I stood at the far end of the street. The winter air bit into my cheeks, the cold climbing under my collar. Ahead of me, a convoy of military police vehicles and Coast Guard Investigative Service agents fanned out around the house I had bought with my sea pay and combat pay. Blue and red lights pulsed against the snow, painting the scene in a surreal rhythm. 5 days ago, I had been stepping off the deck of a cutter at the end of a long deployment, when my phone buzzed with a message from my father, just 6 words. "Do not come home for Christmas. Things have changed." I remember staring at the screen, my sea bag still slung over my shoulder, thinking it was some bad joke. I opened my banking app. The numbers on the screen knocked the breath out of me. 0 balance. Every dollar I had earned on deployment was gone. I called the bank in disbelief. The withdrawal had been authorized by the joint account holder, my father. He and his new wife had moved into my home, changed the locks, and as I would later learn, started renting out the rooms. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed in base housing, my service uniform jacket still on, and attached a single file to an email. It contained my house deed, bank records, and a photograph of the American flag that had once flown proudly from my porch. I sent it to the Coast Guard Investigative Service with one line: suspected theft of deployed service members' pay and property, perpetrator, immediate family. Now, the lead agent was at my father's front door. His voice cut through the cold. "No one moves. Lock the doors." My father's face, just visible through the window, went pale. His wife's eyes darted from the agents to the driveway, as if calculating an escape that no longer existed. I took in the scene without moving, without waving, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing me react. People think revenge looks like shouting and slamming doors. Sometimes it looks like standing perfectly still while justice walks up the steps. They thought I would come here to knock and beg for my place back. But the law has its own way of knocking. And when it does not wait for an invitation. The military police blocked every driveway exit. Their boots crunched over the icy pavement. Neighbors spilled out onto their porches in coats and scarves, eyes fixed on the flashing lights. You could see them whispering, some curious, others already guessing what was happening inside. I felt no rush of triumph, only a steady calm that surprised me. I had rehearsed anger in my head for days, but standing there, watching it unfold, all I felt was a clarity that was almost cold in itself. The lead CGIS agent signaled, and 2 uniformed MPs moved to the back of the property. The front door shut with a heavy thud. They were securing the interior. A week earlier, I had been on the aft deck of our cutter, radio in hand, trying to catch a signal strong enough to check messages. My father's text had come through in broken pixels at first, then fully formed. "Do not come home for Christmas. Things have changed." Back then, I had still believed the house was mine to come back to. I pictured the porch exactly as I left it, the swing, the wreath, and the American flag flying from the pole by the steps. That flag had been a promise to myself. When I came back, it would be the first thing I saw. When I returned in person, the swing was still there, but the wreath was gone. The flagpole was empty, stripped bare as if my place there had been erased along with it. My father's new wife had stood in the doorway, her body angled just enough to block my view inside. Standing on this street now, I kept my gaze fixed on that same porch. The absence of that flag had told me everything I needed to know before I even checked my account. I did not yet know every reason the CGIS team was here. That was part of the plan. Let the neighbors speculate. Let my father sweat through every second of those locked doors. A knock from me could have been ignored. A knock from the United States military could not. And inside, I knew the sound of that knock would echo in ways my father had never expected. I arrived home earlier than anyone expected, the December air sharp in my lungs as I turned onto my street. My car rolled to a slow stop in front of the house I had dreamed about for months, while at sea. The dream cracked the moment I saw what was in the driveway. My father's SUV was parked at an angle I had never allowed when I lived here. Next to it sat a pickup truck I didn't recognize, its bed stacked with moving boxes. Something in me already knew. Still, I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The cold seemed to grow heavier with each step toward the porch. The wreath I had planned to replace with my own was gone. The flagpole by the steps stood bare, a silent warning that this was no longer the home I had left. The front door swung open before I could knock. My father's new wife stood there, framed in the doorway like a guard at a post. Her posture was deliberate. She positioned herself so I couldn't see inside. Her eyes swept over me from the duty jacket still on my shoulders to the duffel bag at my side, and stopped short of anything resembling welcome. Behind her, my father stepped forward. He was wearing his weekend sweatshirt, the same one he'd worn to grill on summer afternoons. But the warmth I remembered from those days was gone. In his hand was a steaming mug of coffee, and in his eyes, an unsettling calm. "Sam," he said, not smiling, not even pretending to be surprised, "you don't live here anymore. We need the space." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him, that maybe there was more to follow, but nothing came. No explanation, no apology, not even a flicker of hesitation. I looked past them, searching for something familiar, but every glimpse I caught was foreign. Furniture had been moved, boxes stacked in corners. A jacket I didn't recognize hung on the coat rack I had bought with my first housing allowance. The words settled in my chest like lead. "You don't live here anymore. We need the space." It was not just eviction, it was erasure. I tightened my grip on the duffel bag. The weight of it grounded me, kept me from stepping forward and demanding answers in a voice I might later regret. Years in uniform had taught me control. On a cutter deck, during a boarding, in storms when the sea tried to take us down. That control was all I had now. My father didn't look away, but he didn't step aside either. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the faint hum of the coffee maker inside. Somewhere deeper in the house, a TV played a morning show. I let my eyes meet his for a final moment, searching for something, guilt, shame, anything, but what I found was resignation. It wasn't that he couldn't fight for me, it was that he had already decided not to. I turned without another word. The boards of the porch creaked under my boots. Each step down felt like walking away from more than a house. It felt like walking away from the life I thought I still belonged to. By the time I reached my car, the door behind me had already closed. The lock clicked, muffled but final, and in that sound I knew, whatever this was, it had been planned long before I set foot back on this street. It felt like being thrown out of my own life, not with shouting, not with force, but with a calm dismissal that left no room for return. And in that moment, standing on the curb in the cold, I understood. If I wanted my place back, I would not be knocking on that door again. The porch looked nothing like the one I had left behind. The old rocking chair I had salvaged from a flea market was gone, replaced by a brand new swing painted in a glossy white that gleamed under the winter sun. The railings had been wrapped with twinkling lights, too bright and too staged, as if someone had dressed the house for a photograph in a magazine. But it wasn't the swing or the lights that stopped me cold. It was the bare flagpole. The place where the American flag had once flown, my flag, was empty. Not a rope, not a clip, nothing but a hollow bracket fixed to the post like an abandoned frame. I had bought that flag from the base exchange before my first deployment. I remembered holding it in the store, still folded in its package, running my thumb over the fabric through the plastic. I told myself that one day, when I had my own home, that flag would fly from the front porch. It would tell anyone who passed by that someone inside had served, that the home had been earned. Before I shipped out this last time, I had taken the flag down, washed it by hand, and folded it in regulation triangle. The morning I left, I hung it again, letting it catch the light as I drove away. I liked to think it would be there waiting for me when I came back, like a silent promise kept. Now, that promise was gone. My father's wife shifted in the doorway, her hands gripping the edge of the frame. Her eyes moved slowly from my boots to my face, not lingering long enough to be friendly. "You've been gone a long time," she said, her voice flat, the kind of tone that leaves no room for argument. "Life has to move on." The words were as calculated as her posture. They weren't about time, they were about ownership, about who got to decide what stayed and what went. I glanced at the empty bracket on the post one last time. She must have noticed, because the corner of her mouth lifted, just slightly, not quite a smile. It was the kind of expression people wear when they think they've already won. I didn't answer. Years in uniform had taught me that silence can be more powerful than anything shouted. My father's wife didn't deserve the satisfaction of a reaction. I turned, walked down the steps, and crossed the small patch of lawn to where my car waited at the curb. In the passenger seat was the one thing I had brought with me from base housing: a black locked case containing every important financial document I owned. House deed copies, bank records, insurance papers, deployment orders. I had kept it separate from everything else, partly out of habit, partly out of instinct. As I slid into the driver's seat, I rested my hand on the case for a moment. It was heavier than it looked. Inside was the paper trail of my life, the kind of evidence that doesn't care about family ties or Christmas invitations. I started the engine, the vibration of it humming through my hands. In the rearview mirror, I saw the porch again. The swing moved slightly in the breeze. The empty flag bracket caught a glint of sunlight, like a reminder that something was missing, and that its absence would not be ignored. I pulled away from the curb without looking back again. The house was no longer my home, but I still carried the proof of what was mine. And I knew, with the same certainty I felt when the deck of the cutter pitched under my feet, that this wasn't over. The next morning, I drove across town to a narrow street, lined with brick buildings that had stood since before I was born. Halfway down the block sat a small coffee shop with a faded awning and a hand-painted sign that read Harbor Brew. I had been there dozens of times before deployments, always with the same friend. Jake Harrington was behind the counter when I walked in. He had been a Marine once, now retired, his left knee still stiff from a roadside blast in Afghanistan. The limp didn't slow him down much. He moved like a man who had learned to adapt to every kind of terrain. He looked up, and his face broke into a grin. "Sam Cole, back from the high seas." I managed a smile, but it didn't hold. He must have seen it in my eyes because his expression shifted immediately. "What happened?" I slid onto a stool at the counter, the smell of fresh coffee and warm cinnamon settling around me. "My dad," I said, my voice low. "While I was deployed, he cleaned out my account. CPay, combat pay, all of it. And he moved into my house, changed the locks." Jake stopped mid-reach for the coffee pot. "You're telling me he took your deployment pay while you were still active duty?" I nodded. He leaned forward, his voice sharpening. "Sam, that's a federal offense. Theft of a service member's pay while they're serving, especially combat or CPay. That's not just wrong, it's criminal. And the law takes it seriously." Hearing him say it out loud put a weight to the situation I hadn't allowed myself to name. Until now, it had been personal, family betrayal, hurt pride. But Jake's tone reminded me that this was bigger than that. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug he set in front of me. "So what do I do? Walk into the police station and file a report against my own father?" Jake shook his head. "Local police aren't who you need. You remember when you worked with that CGIS investigator? What was his name? O'Rourke? You said he handled that smuggling case out of Key West." I did remember. 2 years ago, I had been part of a boarding team that intercepted a fishing vessel off the Florida coast. Hidden under the ice and shrimp were crates of unregistered firearms. CGIS had taken over the case, and Special Agent Patrick O'Rourke had been the lead. He was sharp, methodical, and had a way of asking questions that made you want to tell him everything, even things you didn't think were relevant. I remembered standing on the pier with him after the bust, salt spray on my uniform, and him saying, "If you ever need something looked into, you've got my number." Back then, I thought he was just being polite. Now, I realized he had meant it. Jake poured himself a coffee and leaned his elbows on the counter. "CGIS has jurisdiction over crimes involving Coast Guard personnel. This isn't a civil dispute. It's financial exploitation of an active duty member. If anyone's going to take this seriously, it's them." I stared into the dark surface of my coffee. The idea of involving a federal investigator in something so personal made my stomach twist. But the memory of that bare flagpole, of my father's voice telling me I didn't live there anymore, hardened the hesitation. "You think they'd actually move on it?" I asked. Jake gave me a look that carried the weight of his own service years. "If you hand them proof, they won't just move on it. They'll walk right up to that door and make sure everyone inside knows exactly what line they crossed." I took a slow breath. feeling the first stirrings of resolve. The locked case in my car wasn't just a precaution anymore, it was a weapon. And now I knew exactly who to hand it to. Somewhere between the smell of coffee and the sound of Jake's voice, a plan began to take shape. That night, I sat at the small desk in my rented room, the glow from my laptop casting sharp shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows, rattling them in their frames. I pulled the black locked case from under the bed and set it on the desk, the metal clasp clicking open like a gun being cocked. One by one, I laid out the documents. The house deed with my signature at the bottom, the bank statements showing every deposit from my CPay and combat pay, the withdrawal records that drained it all while I was on deployment, screenshots of my father's text message telling me not to come home for Christmas, and finally, the photograph I had taken that afternoon. My porch without the flag, the empty bracket catching the pale winter light. The photo hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just a missing flag. It was the absence of the promise I had made to myself. That porch was supposed to be my welcome home, the proof that everything I had worked for was waiting when I returned. Seeing it stripped bare had been like finding my name erased from my own life. I organized the files in precise order, timeline first, supporting documents next, photographs last. Years in uniform had trained me to think like an investigator, make it easy for them to see the whole picture at a glance. When everything was in place, I opened a new email and typed in the address from my memory. Patrick O'Rourke, CGIS. I had held onto his contact for 2 years, never thinking I'd actually use it. Now, it felt like the only line I could throw myself. In the subject line, I typed, urgent, potential financial exploitation, active duty member. The body of the email was short. No emotion, no long explanations, just the facts they would need to move. I wrote one sentence, suspected theft of deployed service members' pay and property, perpetrator, immediate family. I attached the file, the cursor blinking as the progress bar filled. My finger hovered over the mouse for a moment, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. This wasn't just reporting a crime. This was lighting a fuse that would burn straight into my father's living room. I clicked send. The whoosh of the email leaving was louder in my ears than it should have been. I leaned back in the chair, my pulse sharp in my neck. The feeling that followed was strange, part relief, part fear, like stepping onto solid ground after days at sea but knowing a storm is still behind you. I closed the laptop and locked the case again, sliding it back under the bed. In the quiet that followed, I realized there was no turning back. The moment that file landed in their inbox, this stopped being just between me and my father. It became evidence in a federal investigation. Somewhere, maybe even before morning, an agent would open my email and start reading. And when they did, they'd see not just numbers and signatures, but a pattern. They'd see that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a family argument. It was deliberate, calculated, and done while I was serving my country. Lying in bed later, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the flag. About how, when the day came to hang it again, it would mean more than just reclaiming a porch. It would mean reclaiming my name, my place, and every piece of ground I'd fought for. The wind outside kept pushing at the windows, but I slept with the kind of resolve that comes only when you finally decided to stop standing outside the door and start knocking with the full weight of the law. 2 days after I sent the email, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was a calm, deliberate voice, introducing himself as Special Agent Patrick O'Rourke from the Coast Guard Investigative Service. He confirmed he had received my file, and within an hour, an unmarked government sedan was parked outside my building. O'Rourke stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing the same composed expression I remembered from Key West. We sat at my small kitchen table while he asked questions. Some I expected, some that caught me off guard. He wanted dates, bank transaction details, and descriptions of every conversation I'd had with my father since I left for deployment. I gave him everything. As he took notes, I noticed how methodical he was, flipping through the documents I had printed for him, marking pages with sticky tabs. The more complete the picture, the faster we can move, he said. That afternoon, he visited the neighborhood. I didn't go with him, but I knew how small-town streets worked. Word would travel faster than any official report. By evening, I was getting text messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. One of them was Mrs. Langley, who lived 2 houses down from mine. She'd always been friendly in the neighborly way, waving from her porch, bringing over extra zucchini bread in the summer. Her message read, "Saw a government car at your dad's today. Is everything all right?" When I didn't answer right away, she followed up with a voicemail. In it, she sounded almost hesitant. "Sam, I don't know what's going on, but I thought you should know. Your dad's been telling folks this is his house now. He's been throwing these little get-togethers, loud music, barbecue going in the middle of December. It's like he's celebrating something. I could picture it. The porch strung with lights, the swing creaking under the weight of guests, the smell of grilled meat mixing with the winter air, and him standing there with a drink in his hand, telling anyone who would listen about his new home." Later that night, another neighbor, Mark from across the street, sent me screenshots from Facebook. My father's wife had been posting almost daily, photos of the living room redecorated in a style that looked nothing like mine. Neutral tones, faux fur throws, oversized candles. Her captions made my jaw tighten. "Starting fresh in our forever home. A new chapter for our family." Not a single mention of me. No acknowledgement that the down payment, the mortgage, and every stick of furniture had been paid for with my service pay. To anyone scrolling through her page, the house had always been theirs. In one photo, I spotted a familiar detail, my bookshelf. Only now, the shelves were stripped of my worn paperbacks and filled with decorative glass vases. My books were probably in a box somewhere, shoved into a closet or sold off. Scrolling through those images on my phone in the dark, I realized that this wasn't just about money or property. It was about rewriting a narrative. They weren't just living in my house, they were erasing me from it. Every party, every staged photograph was a brick in the wall they were building to keep my name out of the story. O'Rourke called the next morning to confirm he'd spoken to multiple neighbors, each one giving similar accounts of the parties and the boasting. "They're not exactly keeping a low profile," he said. I could hear the faint sound of papers shuffling on his end, the deliberate tone of someone already connecting dots. I didn't need to ask what that meant. It meant the picture was becoming clear, and it wasn't just me who could see it now. The difference was this time, the picture would end up in a federal case file with my name at the top, and theirs right below it. Every time I drove past my street, I felt the same pull, a sharp physical urge to turn the wheel, park right in front of the house, and march up those steps. I imagined pounding on the door, demanding to be let in, daring them to look me in the eye and say I didn't belong there. I could picture the scene too clearly, my father standing in the doorway, his wife hovering behind him, both of them scrambling to come up with the right words to justify what they had done. But each time the fantasy started to build, I forced myself to stop. I had already given CGIS the file. O'Rourke was working the case. If I let my emotions take over and walked up to that door, I could undo everything. One wrong move, a confrontation, a shouted word within earshot of the wrong person, and they would twist it into something it wasn't. I could almost hear their voices. "She's unstable. She's angry. We were just trying to live our lives." That wasn't going to happen, not this time. So instead, I drove past slowly, keeping my distance, my hands tight on the wheel. From the street, I could see pieces of what used to be mine. The outline of my sofa through the front window, the porch railings I had sanded and painted by hand one summer weekend. The swing on the porch moved slightly in the wind, and every time I saw it, it was like the ghost of the flag I had hung there before leaving. The image of that flag always brought me back to a memory I hadn't thought about in years. I was 10, standing on the deck of my father's old fishing boat. The air smelled like salt and engine oil, and the waves slapped softly against the hull. My father was kneeling beside me, holding a coil of rope in his hands. "Watch carefully," he said, looping the rope through the cleat. "You don't just tie it so it stays, you tie it so it means something. A knot should hold under pressure, no matter the weather." He had looked toward the bow then, where a small American flag fluttered from its mount. "Same with that," he said, pointing. "The flag's not just decoration. You put it where people can see it, so they remember to respect it. And you keep it high enough that nothing else overshadows it." I remember nodding, trying to mimic the knot he'd made, my small hands clumsy with the rope. Back then, I thought the lesson was about boats and flags. It took me years to realize it was about presence, about claiming space and not letting anyone diminish it. That was the man I had grown up with, the one who taught me how to stand straight, how to speak clearly, how to hold my ground. Somewhere between then and now, he had decided I didn't deserve the same space he once told me to claim. Holding on to that memory was painful, but it also kept me steady. It reminded me that I didn't need to storm up the steps to prove my point. The investigation was my knot, tied carefully, designed to hold under pressure, so I kept my distance. I didn't comment on their posts. I didn't respond to neighbors' gossip. I stayed quiet, even when the silence burned, because the longer I held back, the more they believed I had walked away. And the more they believed that, the less they would see the storm building just out of sight. I knew the day would come when someone else would knock on that door for me. And when it happened, it wouldn't be with raised voices or empty threats. It would be with the full weight of the law, exactly the way it needed to be. The call came after dawn. I was lacing my boots when the phone vibrated on the counter. Special Agent O'Rourke did not waste words. He confirmed 2 subpoenas, one to the bank and one to a property manager tied to my father's new friends. His voice stayed steady while he read his notes. The facts landed like cold water. Your pay was not only swept to cover household bills, he said. Large transfers were routed through a shell company, Sunrise Haulage LLC. The entity did not exist 6 months ago. It was formed 2 weeks after you deployed. I felt the lace bite my fingertips. What do they haul? I asked. Because my father does not own a truck. Containers, he answered. Short hops from the port to off-site storage. We are seeing cashier's checks drawn from your deposits. They match invoices labeled equipment fees and service surcharges. I tried to imagine my father inside a warehouse, counting other people's boxes as if they were his. O'Rourke kept going. There is more. Bills of lading list garden supplies. The weights do not match. An inspector flagged one container last month. It was released after a call from a private number linked to the same group. He paused, letting the air cool. Sam, this is beyond a family dispute. The room felt smaller. My breath came steady, clipped by training. I watched a shaft of winter light crawl across the laminate as he spoke. He asked if my father had ever talked about port work. He had not. He asked if any friends of his had trucking permits. I gave him 2 names from old barbecues, men who bragged about beating scales and knowing which gates looked the other way. What are you thinking? I asked, though I already knew. Illicit cargo, he said. Maybe counterfeit electronics, maybe parts that should never leave a bonded yard. Your funds were seed money. That triggers federal interest. I sat down. The chair legs scraped the floor. The sound felt louder than it should. Betrayal had been a house with my name missing from the mailbox. This was different. This was a map of decisions leading far past a porch without a flag. My father had not only taken what I earned, he had bet it on a network that lived in shadows. O'Rourke shifted into the measured cadence of a briefing. We will move discreetly. Do not approach the house. We are building probable cause on 3 prongs. Financial exploitation of an active duty member, fraud under false pretenses, and conspiracy related to smuggling. Keep your records secure. Expect follow-up questions. I said I understood. He exhaled once. I know this is personal. Keep doing what you have been doing. Stay calm. Let us carry the risk. He ended the call with a promise to update me within 48 hours. I set the phone down and stared at my hands. Salt and rope had toughened them over the years. The work had never scared me. What scared me now was the realization that the man who taught me to tie a knot that holds under weather had let go of every knot inside himself. He had begun to value shortcuts more than seams. The street outside was quiet. Frost clung to the edges of parked cars. I poured coffee and watched steam rise like a signal. In my head, I walked the sequence again. Deployment, message, empty account, empty flag bracket. Then a paper trail bending toward a warehouse. Each step rewrote the story. I was no longer fighting for one door. I was standing at the mouth of a corridor with federal locks on every turn. I wanted to drive past the house. I did not. I wanted to ask him why. I did not. The only thing I allowed myself was a promise. If he faced the truth, I would stand still and listen. If he ran from it, I would not chase. The law would. Either way, I would keep my bearing. That is what the uniform taught me. That is what the flag still meant, even when the pole stood bare. When the coffee cooled, I opened my notebook and wrote what I knew in tight lines. Dates, amounts, names, plate numbers, snippets of overheard boasts from those summer cookouts. I wrote one more line under all of it. Not a threat, not a prayer. A fact. This is no longer family. This is a crime now, undeniably so. I did not hear his voice. I only pieced it together from the pauses I had known all my life. You can tell a man's mind is loud when his hands move slower than usual. He had been laid off in late spring, months before my deployment. The letter from the shipping company was brief, almost cold. Position eliminated. He told no one outside the house. Bills began to stack in the drawer where he once kept fishing licenses. He sold the boat quietly, telling neighbors he didn't have time to use it anymore. The truth was that fuel and slip fees had turned into a kind of slow leak he could no longer plug. Then came the mortgage on the old place, still in his name, still chewing through what he had left in savings. The new wife, bright smile, quick laugh, expensive tastes, had friends who measured worth in vacations and remodels. He didn't want to be the man at the table who could only talk about coupons. One evening, over beers with an old port contact, someone mentioned an opportunity. Quick cash, no heavy lifting. Just let your name ride on a trucking permit. Handle a few invoices, keep your mouth shut. He hesitated. Then the friend asked how his daughter was doing. He said I was deployed again, somewhere hot. The man nodded slowly, as if that answered more than the question asked. That night, in the quiet of the kitchen, he looked at the unopened bank statement with my name on it. He had the password. I had never changed it from the one he set for me when I was 18. The first withdrawal was small, enough to test the water. When nothing happened, he took more. He told himself I would not need it right away. That combat pay was a cushion, not a lifeline. He told himself I was strong. That strength meant I could absorb a blow without staggering. He told himself families share burdens, even when one does not ask. But somewhere deeper, the place no one else could see, he knew this was not sharing. It was taking. It was rearranging the pieces on the board so that he could keep sitting where he wanted while someone else stood. He thought of calling me. He didn't. He thought of writing a note, just in case I came home early. He didn't. Words would make it real. When the first investment paid a little, he felt relief that was almost joy. The second time, the margin was thinner. The third, he was covering a shortfall with what was left of my account. By then, the port jobs had become bolder. Heavier loads, fewer questions. There were moments, late at night, when he imagined my face if I walked through the door and saw the new furniture, the SUV, the way my flag was gone. He would tell himself I'd understand. That my world was different now, that I'd seen worse than a man trying to keep his life from caving in. But he also knew there was a line he had crossed. The one he had warned me about when I was a kid and tempted to lie about breaking a window. Once you choose wrong, Sam, you don't get to decide the cost. The thought came and went like a tide, sometimes gentle, sometimes pulling hard enough to make him grip the counter. He would shake it off, pour another coffee, tell himself the plan was temporary. One good season, one good run, and he'd set it right. Only, in the quiet corners of his mind, he had already admitted the truth. There is no such thing as temporary when the thing you risk is trust. And trust, once broken, does not wait by the door for you to bring it back. The morning air bit at my cheeks as I stood at the far end of the street, hands tucked deep into the pockets of my field jacket. I knew this view would be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. The black SUVs rolled in first, their windows dark, engines idling low and steady. Then came the white military police vans, their doors sliding open with a precision that spoke of long practice. CGIS agents stepped out, heavy vests tight across their chests, radios clipped high on their shoulders. Positions, I heard someone say into a mic. In less than 30 seconds, the entire block was a controlled perimeter. Yellow tactical gloves signaled. Footsteps fell into rhythm on the pavement. The lead agent, a tall woman with her hair pulled back into a no-nonsense knot, strode to the porch. Her voice cut through the cold like a blade. No one moves. Lock the doors. It wasn't a request. It was the sound of authority hitting its mark. From where I stood, I could see my father freeze mid-step. The coffee mug in his hand tilted just enough for a thin brown line to drip down the side. His wife, my stepmother, stood behind him in the doorway, her painted nails gripping the frame as if it could hold her upright. Neighbors were already gathering, pulling jackets tight, their conversations dropping to whispers. The woman from across the street, the one who always waved at me when I came home in uniform, kept her eyes fixed on the scene, her lips pressed into a straight, bloodless line. One CGIS agent peeled off from the group and moved toward the driveway, glancing at the SUV parked there, my father's, and the silver pickup I didn't recognize. Another pair went to the back, their boots crunching over frost-coated grass. Every motion was deliberate. No one was rushing, they didn't need to. I kept my distance. This wasn't my show to run. I had already done my part, long before the first tire rolled into this neighborhood. Inside the house, shapes moved past the windows. One agent leaned in through the open front door, speaking in a tone low enough that I couldn't make out the words. My father nodded once, slow, as though each movement carried weight. And yet, I knew him well enough to read the set of his jaw, the tightness at the corners of his mouth. He wasn't confused. He knew exactly why they were here. The same way I knew the file I had sent was now somewhere in an evidence bag, printed, stamped, and logged. The stepmother's eyes flicked to the street. They landed on me for a fraction of a second, and her face shifted. Recognition, disbelief, and something sharper I couldn't quite name. Then she looked away. The flagpole bracket I had installed on the porch was still there, empty. A pale outline marked where the base of the flag had once shielded the wood from the sun. For a heartbeat, that small, silent absence felt louder than the agent's commands. "Perimeter secure," someone reported over the radio. The lead agent stepped back, scanning the porch, the vehicles, the street. Her gaze followed the line of sight that connected me to the house. She didn't say my name, but she didn't need to. I gave her a nod. She returned it, brief, professional, before turning back to her team. From where I stood, it looked as if my father's world had shrunk to the size of that porch. The street, the neighbors, the agents. They weren't background noise anymore. They were the reality pressing in from all sides. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity either. What I felt was a kind of steady, controlled certainty. The same I'd had on operations overseas when the plan was unfolding exactly as rehearsed. They thought I would come home, knock on the door, and plead for what was mine. But the law has its own way of knocking, and when it does, it doesn't wait for you to open. The front door stood wide open now, the cold wind slipping past the agents as they moved in and out with quiet efficiency. A CGIS officer stepped onto the porch, holding a thick folder in one hand and a clipboard in the other. She spoke directly to my father, her voice carrying just enough to reach where I stood. "Mr. Cole, this is a search warrant. We will be seizing documents related to financial transactions, property transfers, and any lease agreements connected to this address." My father took the paper without a word, though I could see the tremor in his fingers. His wife stood close behind him, peering over his shoulder at the bold header that left no room for misunderstanding. Inside, drawers opened and closed. Cabinets were inspected. Another agent emerged carrying a small lockbox, the kind I'd seen in my old room years ago. I knew it wasn't mine. My belongings had been boxed away long before. But I also knew the type of things such boxes held. Original deeds, bank records, proof of ownership. "Copy of the house title transfer," one agent reported, flipping through the pages inside a clear evidence sleeve. "Bank statements from the past 12 months. Another called from the dining room, holding up a thick stack. Then came the one that stopped me cold. Lease agreement for the upstairs bedroom, dated 2 months ago, signed by a tenant, not Samantha Cole. It took a second for the words to settle. They hadn't just taken my house. They had rented out my own room while I was still on deployment. I clenched my jaw, feeling the muscles tighten in my neck, but my hands stayed buried in my pockets. A voice came from the growing knot of neighbors on the sidewalk. "I thought this was Sam's house," Mrs. Keaton said, loud enough for the whole block to hear. She had known me since I was 15, had watched me leave for boot camp, had sent care packages with cookies that always arrived crumbled, but sweet. Her husband muttered something back, But it didn't matter. The sentence was out there now, floating in the cold air like a challenge. I caught the sideways glances, the way people's brows knit together as they tried to reconcile what they were seeing with the stories they'd been told. My father's head turned toward the crowd, his mouth opening as if to respond, but no words came. His wife stepped in quickly, smiling in that brittle way people do when they want to pretend nothing is wrong. "Misunderstanding," she said, waving a hand toward the agents as though they were some kind of overzealous home inspectors. But the agents kept working, their gloved hands sorting through paperwork, with the patience of people who knew they had all the time they needed. The lead agent reappeared on the porch, jotting something down on her clipboard before tucking the search warrant into a plastic sleeve. She made eye contact with me briefly, a silent confirmation that the paper trail was exactly what they had expected to find. From the porch, I could hear the sound of tape being peeled and smoothed over cardboard evidence boxes. Each sealed container that came out felt like a brick being pried from the wall of the life they had tried to build without me, and at my expense. Mrs. Keaton's words kept echoing in my head. I thought this was Sam's house. It was more than a question. It was a crack in the image my father had worked so hard to present to this neighborhood. And cracks have a way of spreading. I didn't step forward. I didn't explain. This wasn't the time for my voice. It was the time for the facts to speak. And the facts were now in the custody of the United States government. 2 months later, I got the message through Jake. "Your dad wants to meet," he said, his voice neutral, as if testing the air. We agreed on a diner off the interstate, neutral ground. I arrived early, slid into a booth with my back to the wall, and ordered black coffee. Outside, winter had dulled into that pale, lingering cold that seeps into your bones. I wrapped my hands around the cup for warmth, even though the heat barely touched me. When my father walked in, it took me a second to recognize him. The tailored jackets, the pressed collars, gone. His coat was frayed at the cuffs, his shoulders rounded as if under invisible weight. He spotted me and hesitated just long enough for me to notice before walking over. "Sam," he said, voice quieter than I remembered. I nodded toward the seat across from me. He sat down without taking off his coat, eyes flicking to the coffee pot but not asking for any. His hands rested on the table, fingers laced tightly, knuckles white. "I lost the job," he began. "The contracting company let me go a month before Christmas. The debts. They were already piling up. The house was supposed to be a way out." His words tumbled in fragments, as if rehearsed in his head but coming apart in the air between us. I thought. He stopped, looking at me for the first time, eyes tired. "I thought maybe you'd understand. You've always been strong, Sam. You've survived worse than most people ever will. I figured you'd get through this too." I let the silence stretch. It was the kind that makes people want to fill it, but I didn't give him that comfort. I wanted him to feel the space, to feel how far apart we were now. Finally, I spoke. "I have understood, Dad. For 28 years, I have understood. I've understood the late nights you didn't come home when I was 10. I've understood the times you asked me to cover for you with Mom. I've understood every broken promise, every time you told me to be patient because things will get better." His shoulders sank a little more with each word. "But understanding," I continued, "doesn't mean I allow it. It doesn't mean I give you permission to take what isn't yours, to use my work, my service, as a cushion for your mistakes." He exhaled, slow and heavy, and his gaze dropped to the table. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he murmured. "I know," I said, "and I meant it. But you did?" The waitress stopped by, refilling my cup. He shook his head when she asked about him. "I'm not asking for anything," he said after she left. "I just needed you to know I'm sorry." It was almost convincing. Almost. But there was something behind his eyes. Regret, yes, but also the quiet calculation of a man still looking for an angle. I leaned forward just enough for him to notice. "Dad, I don't hate you, but I also don't trust you. And trust, once gone, doesn't come back with words." He nodded, and for a moment I saw the man who had once taught me how to tie the halyard on a flagpole. The one who told me a flag should be where people could see it and respect it. That man was still in there somewhere, buried under the choices he'd made. When we stood to leave, he looked older than when he'd walked in. He reached out as if to put a hand on my shoulder, but thought better of it. "Take care of yourself, Sam," he said. "I always do," I replied. And I walked out into the cold, the sound of the diner door closing behind me feeling more like a period than an ellipsis, the end of a sentence I'd been reading my whole life. We stood in the parking lot beside his rusting sedan, exhaust curling into the cold air. He shifted from foot to foot, glancing at the ground as if the cracks in the asphalt might give him the right words. "I know I messed up," he said finally, voice catching. "I crossed a line I never should have crossed." For a heartbeat, I almost believed this was the moment, the clean break where remorse turns into accountability. But then he kept going. "You have to understand. I was drowning, Sam. The bills, the creditors, the mortgage. Every day felt like I was one letter away from losing everything. And then you were overseas, pulling in hazard pay, C-pay. It was just sitting there, not doing you any good in the moment. I thought." He trailed off, searching my face for something. Forgiveness, agreement, a hint of sympathy. "You thought you could take it," I finished for him, my tone steady. "And I wouldn't notice. Or worse, that I'd notice and still let it slide because you're my father." He flinched. "It's not like that. I meant to make it right. I just never had the chance." That was the problem. There's always a meant to with him. Always an invisible timeline that stretches just long enough for the damage to be permanent. "You talk about circumstances," I said. "Like they make the choice for you, but they don't. You do." He ran a hand down his face, looking older in the midday light. "I'm sorry, Sam. I am. But you've never had to juggle a family, a mortgage, and a job you hate just to keep the lights on." The defense landed like a stone in my chest. Not because it was true, but because it showed me he still didn't get it. He was sorry for the fallout, sorry for getting caught, sorry for the distance that now yawned between us. But he wasn't sorry for the choice itself. Not really. "That's the thing," I said quietly. "You see yourself as a man cornered. I see you as a man who had options and took the one that hurt the person who trusted you the most." His eyes softened for a second, and in them I saw two truths, fighting for space. One was regret, deep and genuine. The other was the same self-preserving instinct that had driven his decisions all along. The part of him that still needed the story to be partly out of his control. It wasn't villainy in the cinematic sense. It was smaller, messier, a mix of weakness and pride, the kind that can live in someone for years without ever burning itself out. "I can't change what happened," he said, almost pleading. "But I want you to know I didn't do it because I don't care about you." "I know," I said. "That's what makes it worse." The wind picked up, tugging at my coat. He shoved his hands into his pockets, gaze drifting toward the highway. I could feel the conversation collapsing into the same old loops, his explanations, my refusals, and I knew it was time to end it. "You've admitted you were wrong," I said. "But until you stop excusing it, we're not moving forward." "Not really." His jaw tightened. He nodded, but I could tell it wasn't sinking in the way it should. This was a man halfway to clarity, stuck between seeing the truth and protecting himself from it. I turned to go, my boots crunching on the grit-strewn pavement. Behind me, his voice carried just enough for me to hear. "I just wish things could go back to how they were." I didn't answer, because the truth was, they couldn't. And maybe, deep down, neither of us really wanted them to. Christmas came around again, 1 year later. The snow crunched under my boots as I stepped onto the porch that was mine again. Legally, rightfully, undeniably. My gloves brushed against the folded American flag I had carried for years, through deployments and storms at sea. With steady hands, I secured the bracket, lifted the pole, and let the flag unfurl into the cold winter air. The fabric snapped once, then billowed wide, the red, white, and blue catching the pale morning sun. Beside it, I hung the Christmas wreath I had made myself, pine branches, ribbon, and small brass bells that chimed when the wind moved through them. It wasn't just decoration, it was a declaration. This house wasn't just back in my possession, it was alive again. From inside came the low hum of conversation and the faint clink of mugs. Jake was by the fireplace, laughing with 2 of our old shipmates. They'd helped me move back in, repair the porch rail, and haul my boxes from storage. In the corner, a pot of coffee steamed on the table. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted through the open doorway. I stepped back to take it all in, the flag, the wreath, the warm glow of the house behind me. Last year, I'd stood in this spot with nothing but a locked door in front of me and the sting of betrayal in my chest. Today, I stood here with my home restored, the air filled with the sound of people I trusted. Jake came out onto the porch, his breath clouding in the cold. "Looks right," he said, nodding toward the flag. "It does," I agreed. "Feels right, too." We stood for a moment in silence, the flag rippling above us. There was no need to say more. This was what victory looked like for me. Not shouting, not gloating, but reclaiming my space and planting my symbols exactly where they belonged. Inside, someone called for me, and I turned toward the door. Before stepping in, I looked back one last time at the flag, knowing it would be the first thing anyone saw when they came up this street. Exactly as it should be. That night, when the guests had gone and the house had gone quiet, I stepped back onto the porch. The snow had stopped, leaving a silver sheen over the yard. The flag was still there, lit by the porch light, moving gently in the winter breeze. I thought about something my father had once told me when I was a kid, standing on the deck of a ship. The flag has to be where everyone can see it and respect it. Back then, I thought he meant it literally. Now I understood it differently. It wasn't just about visibility. It was about being in the right place, where you're valued, protected, and allowed to stand without fear of being pushed out. For the first time in a long time, I was in that place. I hadn't just taken back a house. I had reclaimed my presence, my right to exist without apology, without someone else deciding I didn't belong. That was something no one could take from me again. I took a slow breath, the air cold in my lungs, and let my eyes linger on the flag. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care. I'll see you in the next story.